The Iran-Israel-US conflict, a high-stakes confrontation in the heart of the Middle East, where regional rivalries and global interests collide.
Triggered by years of growing proxy wars, cyber attacks, and nuclear tensions, the conflict now risks engulfing the region in a broader war with global repercussions. The embers of history, roots of the conflict. The 2025 conflict between Iran, Israel, and the United States is the culmination of decades of accumulated tension, ideological rivalries, and strategic disputes. To understand the present, one must return to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, when Shah Reza Pahlavi, supported by the US, was overthrown and replaced by a theocratic regime led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Since then, Iran has positioned itself as a direct adversary of Western influence in the Middle East, severing diplomatic ties with Washington and declaring opposition to the existence of Israel, which it regards as an illegitimate Zionist entity. Israel, in turn, was founded in 1948 amid the collapse of the British Empire and the Holocaust that devastated Europe's Jewish population. Engaged in successive wars with its Arab neighbors, the country built a powerful military and technological machine, becoming the region's only undeclared nuclear power. Relations between Israel and Iran were initially pragmatic during the Shah's rule, but became irreconcilable after 1979. From the 2000s onward, Iran's nuclear program and the belligerent rhetoric of its leaders heightened fears of a direct confrontation. The United States, a historic ally of Israel and a dominant force in the Persian Gulf since World War II, sees Iran as a destabilizing factor in regional balance. Since the September 11th attacks, American policy in the Middle East has grown increasingly aggressive, prioritizing energy security and the containment of Islamic extremism. Harsh sanctions, covert sabotage, and targeted strikes form the backbone of the U.S. strategy, aiming to suffocate Iranian capabilities without open war, at least until now. In recent years, the battlefield has also shifted to cyberspace and zones of indirect influence. Iran and Israel have been engaged in a shadow war through cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure, military facilities, and banking systems. Iran's Natanz nuclear facility and Israel's water and energy systems have been documented targets. Meanwhile, Iran-aligned militias, such as Hezbollah, the Houthis, and factions in Iraq, operate as asymmetric arms in a proxy war, creating an explosive web of interconnected micro-conflicts. This landscape reveals that the current crisis did not emerge spontaneously. It was carefully incubated over decades on a chessboard where every move brings the world closer to geopolitical catastrophe. Ignition, the spark of total war. By mid-2025, the latent conflict between Iran and Israel crossed the point of no return. The spark came in the form of a surprise attack attributed to Iran on an Israeli military base in the Negev desert, using long-range armed drones and ballistic missiles launched from Syrian territory. The offensive killed dozens of soldiers and destroyed part of a subterranean nuclear facility. In response, Israel launched a large-scale military operation named Sword of Fire, bombing Hezbollah installations in Lebanon, Iranian bases in Syria, and, for the first time, military targets inside Iranian territory, including missile factories and command centers. Iran responded by launching missiles at Tel Aviv and Haifa, killing civilians and forcing millions to seek shelter. For the first time since the Gulf War, air raid sirens sounded across all of Israel. Meanwhile, Iran-aligned Shiite militias fired rockets from Iraq and Yemen, expanding the theater of war. This escalation led the United States to intervene directly, first by deploying aircraft carriers and missile defense systems to the Persian Gulf, and then by coordinating strikes on Iranian targets in the Strait of Hormuz and the Bandar Abbas region. The Western coalition accused Iran of seeking the destruction of Israel and destabilizing the global oil balance. The U.S. justified its direct intervention as legitimate defensive allies under existential threat. In turn, Iran claimed it was responding to decades of aggression and indirect occupation and activated military cooperation treaties with Russia, Syria, and non-state armed groups. As world powers positioned themselves militarily, civilian areas became major targets of the conflict. Hospitals, schools, and densely populated zones in Tehran, Gaza, and Tel Aviv were struck, increasing casualties and international pressure. What began as surgical strikes had devolved into a humanitarian tragedy. Refugee convoys crossed borders, and UN agencies warned of an imminent regional catastrophe. The Middle East, long marked by suffering, now burned with flames of global proportions. Axes of power, alliances, technology, and propaganda. With diplomatic relations between Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Washington in total collapse, the world plunged into a new Cold War, now reconfigured into multipolar blocs. The alliance between the United States, Israel, the United Kingdom, France, and several Gulf monarchies now faced an informal axis that included Iran, Syria, Russia, Shiite militias, and, discreetly, the diplomatic and technological support of China. Although officially neutral, Beijing condemned American actions and increased its delivery of defense systems to Iran. The war also took on an unprecedented cyber and informational dimension. Satellites were hacked, surveillance systems disabled, and social networks flooded with disinformation campaigns that inflamed nationalist passions. In Israel and Iran, messianic rhetoric began to dominate public imagination. In the US, the conflict polarized society between isolationists and interventionists, right in the middle of an election year. As autonomous drones fought over the skies of Mesopotamia and hypersonic missiles crossed borders in minutes, a new type of warfare took shape. Decentralized, technological, and deeply symbolic. Images of destruction in Gaza, Tehran, and Haifa went viral, turning human suffering into geopolitical currency. The classical concept of a front line disappeared. Now the conflict also raged through fiber optic cables, spy satellites, and the manipulation of global public opinion. Within this context, propaganda became a strategic weapon of the first order. Each side sought to shape the international narrative to justify its actions and garner sympathy. Manipulated videos, prisoner statements, and simulated attacks dominated the news. Truth became fluid, and the information war proved just as vital as territorial control. The battle between reality and fiction became an integral part of the modern battlefield, where every like, hashtag, or post could tip the balance of global diplomacy. At the edge of the abyss, World War III. As 2025 progresses, the word many feared begins to echo louder. World War III, the involvement of nuclear powers, the crossing of red lines, and the absence of effective diplomatic channels have created a high-risk scenario. With Israel mobilizing its full defense arsenal and Iran promising a total and final response, the world watches anxiously for the possible use of weapons of mass destruction. Russian maneuvers in the Caucasus and the Caspian Sea suggest preparations for broader conflict. Chinese troops were seen in joint exercises with Iranian forces in the Strait of Hormuz. In Turkey, military movements near the Syrian border triggered NATO alerts. The world seems split into three zones: Western allies, the Sino-Russian-Iranian axis, and a vast group of nations desperately trying to remain neutral while suffering the war's collateral effects. Analysts fear that a miscalculated attack, a misinterpreted missile, an unauthorized retaliation, or the use of a tactical warhead could trigger a chain reaction. The doctrine of mutual deterrence is being tested to its limits. Historical precedents are grim. Both 1914 and 1939 began as localized conflicts that spiraled out of control. At the same time, civil movements and dissenting voices emerge amid the chaos. Millions take to the streets in Tehran, New York, Tel Aviv, Paris, Cairo, and Istanbul, demanding peace. But the war machine is already in motion, fueled by economic interests, ideologies, and ancestral rivalries. Global leaders gather in emergency summits in Geneva and Istanbul, but diplomatic solutions are fragile compared to the battlefield reality. A partial ceasefire, mediated by non-aligned powers such as India, Brazil, and Indonesia, is under discussion but stumbles over mutual distrust. Meanwhile, nuclear alert systems are placed on standby, and civilians around the world revive the fear of annihilation. Humanity's fate once again depends on the wisdom or madness of a few men in command rooms. When the end sits at the table. If tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States continue to escalate, the world could witness the definitive collapse of the international order built after 1945. The nuclear balance, which for decades functioned as a deterrent, may now become a catalyst for mutual destruction. The presence of multiple armed actors, decentralized networks, and automated decisions, such as AI-controlled military systems, increases the risk of catastrophic failures. This is not merely about war between nations, but about potential civilizational collapse on a global scale. A large-scale conflict in the Middle East could ignite other regions: the South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, the Balkans, the Caucasus. The energy crisis would spark global recessions. The breakdown of supply chains would trigger famine, scarcity, and the collapse of fragile states. The risk is not only military, it is systemic. Democracies could yield to authoritarianism in the name of security, and surveillance technologies that are today deemed temporary might become permanent. But destiny is not sealed. History is made of improbable turns, of diplomats who outmaneuver generals, of people who resist the logic of hatred, of small gestures that avert greater disasters. In 2025, the world stands at a fork in the road: to continue down the path of polarization and war, or to recover the language of peace, negotiation, and compromise. The central question of the 21st century is no longer who will win, but whether there will be anything left to win. The age of superpowers may be collapsing, and in its place arises an age of super consequences. The future is not guaranteed. It is up for contest, and it begins with the choices being made right now. Official end of the war between Iran, Israel, and the United States. In a historic broadcast held at 1800 hours UTC on June 23, 2025, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced the signing of the Geneva Agreement between Iran, Israel, and the United States, formally ending the conflict that had threatened to ignite a global war. The immediate and bilateral ceasefire was brokered with the mediation of India, Brazil, and Indonesia, marking the beginning of a diplomatic and humanitarian reconstruction process in the Middle East.